Oh, God. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Bob Gumbs, host of the Concerned Forum. And today we're going to do something um, a bit unusual. Today we're going to have a show that's basically in response to something that's happening right now. It's taking place right now in both Nevada and South Carolina. And that is the Democratic primary, where Democrats go about the business of picking who they're going to have to their champion, as it is, to run against the Republicans, which right now looks like it's going to be between on their side Donald Trump, what's his face, Ted Cruz, and Rubio, or as the Republican National Committee probably calls him, Robot Man. And on our side, we have former Secretary of State, former Senator Hillary Clinton, and Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, as I made a promise when I first started this show, and that is of transparency, honesty, and also the respect for truth. So I have to say at the start that I'm with Bernie Sanders. I support Senator Sanders. And I have asked people from Hillary's camp here in New York to come on board the show to speak their piece. So far, to no avail. And for that, to go along with that, I've also had calls to the Republican Party here, the state Republican Party and the city Republican Party, come on board the show and speak their piece. As of yet, that hasn't happened. What I have been fortunate to have is my friend Jessie, and she is a Bernie Sanders volunteer. And as you can see, she's also a young Caucasian woman. And a lot has been made about Hillary and who she, at least her and her camp, have been expecting to automatically be in their corner, no questions asked. And some people have problems with that. And I suspect that my friend Jessie might be one of those people. But let's see. Let's see what she has to say. Jessie?
Yeah, I definitely think that Hillary has assumed that she has the support of a lot of different groups, one of them being women. And actually, just about a week or two ago, we had two feminist activists, Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright, who both said that female supporters of Bernie were just there for the boys because I think she said girls go where the boys are and the boys are with Bernie. So
Oh, okay.
that's the only reason why we could possibly support Bernie.
Oh, my goodness.
And Madeleine Albright said there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. So I think, and to me that's really frustrating to hear, and a lot of my friends were upset with that. There was a hashtag going around on Twitter that said "not here for boys," and I think part of the reason why they're saying those things is because they're from a generation of women who really had to fight for equal rights. And I don't think that we understand that struggle as much being young women. I think that we were born at a time where things are more equal than they used to be. And so we maybe take it for granted that we don't necessarily need a woman in office to represent us.
Well, I tell you, talking on the subject of Hillary and women, I don't want to age myself too much, but I kind of remember back in the 60s and in the 70s, even going into the 80s, the trials and tribulations that women had to go through. I think it's unfair, and I'll be honest about it. Madeleine Albright saying something like that doesn't surprise me. I have issues with Madeleine Albright. But Gloria Steinem, when I heard her say that, as a matter of fact, I saw her looking, when did she say that? On Bill Maher's show. Is that why I saw her say that? Yeah, probably. But when I heard her say that, that really disappointed me because I've always seen Gloria Steinem in many respects as kind of an idol of mine. She's good people. But I would just chalk it up to the pressures of the campaign and her being a major supporter for Hillary. Now, as far as Madeleine Albright is concerned, I've always had a problem with Madeleine Albright. Let me say this very quickly. Colin Powell, who, as we know, first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs, highly decorated combat vet from Nam, etc. He was in the beginning of the Clinton administration before he left. And there was this push with the Clinton team, if not so much Bill, but the people that he had around him, to basically prove to the Republicans that they were macho, that they could be tough. And I'm trying to remember just exactly where the problem was. Was it Haiti? Somewhere where there was a question of applying American force. And Colin Powell, interesting guy, because he is always very, very reluctant to send in the Marines, as it were. But then those of us who have seen combat, lost friends in the military, we usually are. We're usually the last ones to want to throw the first punch. And Powell basically said that, listen, this might be something that we could work through with diplomacy. Madeline is reported as saying that, oh, well, we got this big, beautiful army, this great big military. Why should we be afraid to use it? And to me, that smacked a lot of, what's the current phrase now? Classism. In other words, oh, well, we got a bunch of low income and used to be middle class kids in the military. They're like our toys. Why don't we go ahead and use them? We have a shiny new toy. Let's play with it. And ever since I heard that, I don't really have that much feeling for Madeleine Albright. We had a female congressman here in New York, and I am so sorry because it just popped into my head. What is her name? From Brooklyn. She was represented Brooklyn. And I'm not thinking about Bella Abzug, but I loved Bella. Oh, she was great. But my mom was crazy about it too. Mom actually loved Bella Abzug. But this lady, if I'm not mistaken, she was on either it was the Contra-Iran Committee or it was the Nixon, the Watergate Committee. And she made the comment to a Republican, very sexist person, who basically said, why don't you go home and, bake cakes and have babies or something to that effect. And she said, well, I have a brain and a vagina, and I choose to use them both. And I think that accurately sums up what should be the correct feeling for any American about women living up to their full potential. I, too, feel that this country is overdue for a woman in the White House. But there has to be the right woman.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think that what Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem said should negate everything that they've ever said or their work that's gone on in the past. I think it was just a misstep. But I also think that younger women voters are very careful about who they're voting for. They fact check everything. We're, the generation of the internet. And I think that Hillary has switched her positions on a lot of different things. She hasn't been very consistent. She's done some things that are questionable, and younger voters know that. And I also think it's because older voters have seen her her entire political career, whereas younger voters are seeing just the controversy that's been brought up, and they're not paying attention as much to, the full context of the work that she's done. But I think that younger voters are just being careful about who they're voting for, and not just voting because it's a woman. They want to make sure the person that has their vote is someone who's got integrity and someone who will really fight for them.
Well, I tell you, being an African American and being exposed to politics from an early age, 5, I guess that's an early age. I was 5 years old. My dad was a Republican. Yeah, that's right. He was a black Republican in New York. As a matter of fact, during that time period, I would say almost half of black Americans, registered voters, were registered Republicans. They may have been voting periodically Democratic from the time of FDR, but they were registered Republicans. And my dad was, what the hell was he? The county committee guy in Harlem. And he had ran for the assembly as a Republican, came close to winning, and he was extremely active in Republican politics. But this was at the time when the Republican Party was the Republican Party. This Republican Party now, it's practically unrecognizable. It's extremely racist, and I know a lot of people will take issue with me for saying that, but I can only talk to what I know and what I've seen over the years. And extremely conservative, extremely anti-science, and pro, how should I say this, pro, not just, I don't want to say pro-religion, but pro-religion in the sense that their particular bent towards religion replaces everything that we were taught about what democracy is supposed to be about. A Ted Cruz type. That's what I'm referring to. I also happen to have grown up Roman Catholic, Catholic school, an altar boy. As a matter of fact, I had begun to study for the priesthood. So I take the idea of religion and spirituality very seriously. I think that what's happened with the Republican Party is that they have picked up religion as a baseball bat to beat down the ideas of modernity that they're uncomfortable with, i.e. civil rights, i.e. women's rights. It's totally confusing, and I feel it's totally hostile to what we're supposed to believe as Americans. Quite frankly, I know that somewhere on the other side, Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine are literally screaming, tearing their hair out, observing what's happened to our politics. Now, I think it's wrong. Getting back on the thing about Hillary, I think it's wrong for any politician to take any group of people for granted because of their sex, their race, their religious beliefs. As a black American, I have seen, and again, I know I'm going to catch a lot of static for this one, but as a black American, I have seen the damage, the tremendous damage that's done when people go out and say, well, I'm going to vote for so-and-so because he's black. And yeah, we talk about forbidden topics here on the Concerned Forum, okay? And yeah, among many, well, I won't say many, but among some in the black community, this is a quote-unquote forbidden topic when it comes to speaking about things publicly. But to the point, yeah, I think it's very harmful to the community when we say, well, because this person happens to share a similar genetic background, to me, that yeah, he or she is going to get my vote. That's dangerous because the person that you're voting for might be a complete idiot or a complete charlatan, which unfortunately in the black community has happened to be the case far often than we like to admit. Um, Big question. I voted for Barack Obama both times. I had got an injury from when I was in the Gulf War, which unfortunately haunted me uh, in 2008. And as a result, for a certain time period, I wasn't able to walk. I volunteered for the Obama campaign by staying in the office and working the phones and doing paperwork. When he ran for re-election, I was able to walk by that time, and I went to Philly for him. I went to Ohio for him, and yeah, I supported him not because he was black, but because I honestly felt that the Republicans had literally made a hash out of our economy, out of our foreign policy, you name it, they basically stomped on it. And that's why I supported Barack Obama. Um, I think what we need to do, and not to beat around the bush, and again, some people might take issue with me. The point is that Barack Obama, in many respects, I think he's a good man. Obviously, he's a very skilled and enlightened politician. But guess what? He's made some mistakes. And I don't like what Hillary is doing. And at this point, I might, I don't want to make it seem like I'm getting on a soapbox here, but I think I need to say some things. Some of these things need to be said. And if people are offended, I'm sorry. Obama has made some mistakes. And those of us who love him and support him, we have to deal with that. I think that in some respects, the racial question is the first thing that obviously comes to mind because he is the first black president. And I think that in certain instances, there was a chance to educate America, and he didn't do it. He backed off from it. I think that in terms of racial understanding here in America, I think the people that he had around him worked so hard to make sure that he did not come across as the angry black man that he, whatever he said, it lacked, how should I say, it lacked a certain amount of fervor. And I find him being apologetic at times and on occasions where no apology was even necessary. My God, he had made it to become president of the United States. Why did he feel he had to be careful not to offend? Or why did the people around him feel that they had to be careful not to offend Rush Limbaugh, of all people? An overweight drug addict with a tendency to try to humiliate women who wish to speak for themselves. And I think that that was a mistake. I think it was a mistake for him to follow the foreign policy of George Bush Jr. I think that that was a big mistake. Hillary seems so intent upon trying to, like that. I was this close to Barack Obama, and I'm this close to him now. Well, that really beggars my imagination because, my God, you couldn't have been that close to the man. You ran against him for president. So apparently you had some definite opinions that ran contrary to his. That's fine. Um, no one's going to crucify you for it. And see, this is the thing that I can't understand about what's happened to our politics today. Um, Again, I'm trying not to personalize things too much. Uh, I lost the woman I loved more than anything in life, my wife, and she was very young when she passed away. Beautiful girl, a saint, great heart, everything. But you know, there were times while we were married that she was totally full of blueberry muffins, quite frankly. And I bring that point up just to say that if I could disagree with the woman I loved most in the world, why in the name of God is it so wrong to disagree with a politician? Barack is a nice guy. He's a great family man, beautiful family. But first and foremost, he is a politician. What is a politician? Someone that engages in the practice of politics. What Hillary is trying to do with Senator Sanders, she is trying to take this whole political thing and make it like a sacrament. So to disagree with the president on this issue or that issue is to disagree with Holy Mother Church. And that's insanity. And I don't like this idea that, because I had jotted a few things down on the way over here. This whole idea that you go and speak and say, well, yeah, I can hardly wait to get to South Carolina because that's my firewall. I'm a man. I'm not a firewall. I'm a person. I have feelings. I have opinions. And the way that Hillary and her team has spoken about blacks voting, especially in South Carolina, it makes me feel, are we going back to what South Carolina was originally famous for? A slave market? Like we're to be bartered back and forth? I'm very upset also with the Black Caucus. I know it wasn't the main branch of the Black Caucus that gave Hillary their support. But I know there was a good amount, most of the congressmen who, in the Black Caucus, okay, they do support her. I have a problem with that because I feel that what that organization should have done is waited until, to wait and see who actually won the primary before they came out throwing their support this way and that. We are supposed to be about democracy. Why don't we let the people decide? Why don't we let the people who vote, let them be the judges, let them speak? I have some more to say on the issue, but I know that I'm really hogging the show, and I understand that. But this is something that, for obvious reasons, it really it hits very close to home, and I want to make sure that people understand exactly why I feel so strongly about this. African Americans have been through hell from the time we came to this country. And what we don't need now, at this point, we don't need a fairy godmother of sorts. We don't need this paternalistic, oh, well, these are my people, okay? I'll take care of them. They know I will look out for them. Number one, that's not true, because when I speak later, I will try to bring out some instances where she didn't take care of the African American community. That's number one. Number two, we're adults. We're grown men and women, okay? Those of us that choose to support Secretary Clinton, God bless them. But those that choose to support Senator Sanders, such as myself, I hope that we can expect the same type of blessing. And I'm going to let Jessie see what she has to say about, you know.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right on the point that Hillary has assumed this firewall, which I don't know if she's actually used that term, but that's what the media is saying, and I think that's what she assumes that it is. And I think that she and Bill Clinton too have tried to engage with the black community on a superficial level, or to gain votes on a superficial level. You saw it with Bill Clinton, the first black president, when he played the saxophone on whatever show it was, and yeah, and then you saw what he did in the 90s that expanded the rates of incarceration, especially among black and minority Americans, infinitely. I mean, that was the era of mass incarceration, and it was he expanded the war on drugs, which targeted black communities more so than any other community. He repealed the Welfare Act in the 90s, which hit communities of color more than any other community. And so he was the first black president, and he connected with the black community, but he really didn't do much to help them, and he actually hurt them in many ways. And not to say that Hillary would make the exact same decisions, but she actually advocated for a lot of the same things as Bill, and supported those decisions. So during this campaign cycle, there was a hashtag that she put out. I forgot what it was, but it was saying that Hillary Clinton is just like your abuela, and it was trying to target Latino communities, saying that Hillary Clinton understands your culture and what your grandmother's like and your family. And there was a huge backlash, and people were saying hashtag not my abuela, and saying all the ways that Hillary Clinton is totally different than their grandmothers. And it just showed that Hillary doesn't really understand exactly what minority communities feel, what Latinos feel, and what the black community feels. And so I think there's a lot of examples of those efforts by her to engage minority voters, and she hasn't really showed what she's actually done for them in the past.
Well, I think that in Hillary's case, one of her big problems, what was that saying they had during the campaign in '08? Let Hillary be Hillary. And I think that what she really needs to do, she really needs to follow that advice. Because she always gives the impression of overkill when it's not necessary. It's just like, for example, what is it that cost her the election in '08? Well, people talk about, Obama and his group, they were able to beat the magnificent Clinton machine. Well, the thing about Hillary Clinton, in my opinion, is that usually her biggest damage is usually self-inflicted. I happen to think that the base of the Democratic Party it's like a love-hate relationship with a large amount of the base, because they love her for some of the stands that she did take, during the 90s, but by the same time they're very, very upset with her, and I think that is why she lost the vote in '08. The vote that she made for that crazy, insane, and yes, illegal war, number one, and number two, many people in the base resent the whole Clinton group, because they feel that it was the Clintons that actually, with the help at the beginning of Al Gore, that they were the ones that actually started bringing big money into the Democratic Party. That's the problem. That's this, how would you call it? This thing that a large amount of the base has against the Clintons. And I don't think that she ever understood that. I think that she doesn't understand that now. And I always forget that name. The people, if you would, the people that she made was a $600,000 speech in front of.
The Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, Goldman Sachs. Now, during one of the debate, she tried to accuse Senator Sanders. It really, I started to laugh. I said, here she is. She's trying to accuse Bernie of impugning her integrity. But to me, that seems like an easy way to try and stop people from bringing up the subject. Because when you have, I mean, now what has Goldman Sachs? What is it that they have not done financially? You know, they every time you turn around, Goldman Sachs or one of those other huge Wall Street corporations, they're paying the fines of the federal government for some illegality. Okay, they took our economy in '08 and they literally smashed it against the wall. Millions of people lost money. And when I'm talking about those millions of people, I'm talking about people in their 70s, in some cases older, lost their life savings, you know? How would you like to be 68 and have to go out and start all over again? You know, find yourself working at McDonald's and not as a manager, you know, because of the games played by Goldman Sachs and these other huge Wall Street firms. And then you have somebody that wants to be a president of the United States from your party that for the last, I don't know how many years, has been going to these same people, making a huge amount of money, speaking to them, giving speeches to them. And see, here goes the thing. What were those speeches about?
Right. Well, and that's what people are saying is, why don't you release the transcripts to those speeches? And she said, I will when everyone else does. And, well, first of all, Senator Sanders hasn't made any speeches, or I think he's made one to a Wall Street bank, maybe not even one. But the fact is that when you're receiving millions and millions of dollars from banks and from Wall Street, and Senator Sanders said this in the last debate, those banks aren't stupid. They're not making donations just because they want to give you money and they don't agree with you. You know, if Hillary is actually planning to punish the banks and to put further regulations on them, I don't think that they would be giving her millions of dollars. I think that you support a candidate financially because either you expect favors from them once they're in office, or you are already aligned with their views. I mean, I'm not going to give Donald Trump $400 just because I want to. I would do it because I agreed with his positions or I thought he could do something for me. And it's the same with big banks. They're not giving her millions of dollars for no reason. They're doing it because they either expect something or because they want her in office for a certain reason. And I think that, like you said, she said, oh, don't say this just to impugn my integrity, as a way to kind of, like sweep the issue under the rug. But that's what the whole campaign is about. I mean, that's what this campaign that Bernie is running is about. It's trying to overturn the system where politicians are bought. And every other issue that is important to anyone comes down to the fact that our politicians are not representing us because of big money in the system. And so that should not be something that you just brush off. That's the core of this whole campaign.
I think the problem, as somebody has grown up in the African American community here in the Northeast, and it's the same thing down south, I have a problem with our leadership, and I know that this is supposedly a black thing, but a lot of this stems back to the not the well the 1890s and also early in the last century. This idea of a talented tenth. Um, I believe what was his name? W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the one originally that came up with this phrase as a way to describe what he foresaw or wanted to see happen, I should say, where you have this small group of elite black people that would somehow lead the masses of the black community, upwards. Um, as he got older, he dumped that whole idea. That's why he spent his last days in Africa, in Ghana, because he felt the racism in this country was so immutable. But this kind of goes along with that, where you have these politicians that they go and they touch supposedly what they think is the leadership in the black community. Certain preachers here and there, maybe a black women's sorority or organization, that type of thing. But I think what Hillary and those around her need to realize is that we have changed quite a bit. And you notice that the younger members of the black community are going with Senator Sanders, whereas in many cases, the preacher class, I could call them, the ministerial class, they're going with Hillary. Now, I have to be careful. One, because that's not exactly accurate. And number two, I don't want to fall into a trap. Tell you what I mean about the trap. Hillary and her crew will try and say, oh, well, once it's been shown to them, hey, Hillary, how come these young people don't like you? Why are they going to Senator Bernie? Well, of course, that kind of shakes her up, her and her group up. But then what they do, they try to turn the tables by saying, oh, well, back in the 70s when I was young, we supported McGovern, and look what that did. Turned out to be a big flop, the McGovern campaign. I remember because that was my first time when I was in the military. And I think McGovern took one state. Let me see, that was what, 72? I was, what was that? 17. First time in the service. And they had the election. And he took one state. And you had a great showing of young people out there. But when Hillary says that Bernie is in danger of giving the Democratic Party another McGovern, see, something you got to keep in mind that what was happening in 71, 72? Well, young people, kids my age, were coming back in body bags from all over the world, from Vietnam, terrorist incidents in Germany, the whole bit. We were the ones feeling the brunt. You had the draft and what have you. And so, the young people did not like the idea that them and their friends were basically being used as cannon fodder. The older people, however, who were they? Well, a lot of them were veterans, people in their, 40s and 50s. They all remembered World War II. They all had, those of them who had went to college or had advanced training, they remember the GI Bill. They had their homes, GI home loans, or even if they were in the military, government home loans were easily available. So in their mind, government was a good thing. It was a positive thing. these young kids were basically just hung up on themselves and reluctant to do their duty. You know, I mean, you should have heard some of the stuff that was being said back then. But that was then. This is different now. Because now the whole country, young and old alike, you have 21-year-olds who have to drop out of college because they can't afford it, because it's so damn expensive. You have people in their mid to late 20s, early 30s. They're being hounded by bill collectors. You know, I might, I'm being hounded for $4,000 myself, and I'm a lucky one. You know, what about these people who went to Harvard, Yale, Brown, Syracuse, who had to pay good, good money, $150,000, $200,000 that they owe, and we're not even talking about grad school. You know, I had to quit grad school, but fortunately, I don't owe anything for that. What about their parents? You know, how many parents are going to be overjoyed when they see their 28-year-old son and daughter? Mom, can I have the room, my room back? You know, that's what's happening in this country. And we sit there and we watch the stock market go up and down. We see the people on the top getting forever richer and richer, and we're getting poorer and poorer. Is Obama and his administration correct? Is the unemployment level low? Yeah, it is. However, the feelings that people have in the country about the direction that we're going in, the amount of money that people are able to make and put away, it's an entirely different ball game than when McGovern ran. And see, that's what you need to keep in mind. And what upsets me is that the black community, we feel it just like everyone else, and a little bit, and somewhat more. You had mentioned about the crime issue, okay? I remember in the 90s, and this is what upsets a lot of people. For example, the young lady, what is her name? She has written a book that's come out about the new Jim Crow and the whole thing that so many black and brown men, their lives have been dashed because of their involvement with the criminal justice system. I'm fortunate. I spent a lot of my time in the military, so I was able to avoid a lot of that stuff. Although I have been picked up, breeding while black or and what have you, so I know the feeling. But a lot of that basically originated in the 90s. And people will say, well, Hillary wasn't president then. I say to that, no. I remember when they came into the White House, they made a point of saying, you elect one of us, you get both of us. Not my words, theirs. And, we have to be, as progressives, as liberals, as Democrats, we have to be careful who we put our faith in and how much faith that we put into them. Are they going to stick by the principles that our party, our group is supposed to be about? Or are they going to cave in when the going gets tough? Problem I have with the Clintons is that, especially the first term, they lived their lives in the White House as if to show the Republicans, yeah, we agree with you. We're just like you. We're going to help wage the war on crime. And what they wound up doing, they wound up decimating the communities of color. And I remember seeing this, even during the time when I was in the military, coming home, and basically seeing the males in the community, gone, or they were ruined. You got a black guy, 21, 22 years old. He's been tagged with a felony behind drugs. this guy is not going to go to Chase Manhattan Bank and get a job as a teller. It's not going to happen. It even makes it difficult to get educational loans. And this is, I would say, this is the, what's the proper term? The epilogue, or however you want to phrase it, of the Clintons, the 90s, and the black and brown community. People will look and they'll say, well, hey, you people, you're always talking about you need help. Why don't you do so-and-so? Why don't you get that? Blah, blah, blah. Well, after you have been raked over the coals so that essentially you're almost a non-human because you can't do the things that average Joe Smith can do because you have that record, it makes it pretty hard to organize a community in a positive direction. And that's what the young lady was pointing out in her book. Also, in many parts of the United States, if you have a record, okay, you can't vote. You're a non-citizen. And and believe me, when all this stuff was coming down the pike, the Clintons were not standing up saying, oh no, this is wrong, this is not a good idea. No, they were going right along with it. The whole thing about, as you brought up, about welfare reform, I remember that. And the way that you essentially threw black women, brown women, and children, you threw them to the wolves.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues that I have with Hillary and the Clintons, is that you get the sense that they're running for themselves and they're governing for themselves rather than for the people who they supposedly represent. And you look at, Hillary Clinton used to fight against gay marriage, and then a few years ago she turned and said, "No, I'm for it." And like you mentioned, she said that she was supporting the black community, and then she went along with her husband's policies. And, so she does all these things where she says she's for one thing, and then she changes her position and says, oh, I've evolved on it. But really, it's just that her positions can change based on what her goal is at the moment. And I think a lot of people don't trust her for that reason. And I think that when you elect someone to office, you know that there are a lot of decisions that they'll have to make that you won't know of ahead of time. So you're not electing them for their specific positions on everything. You're electing them because you trust them to act in your best interests all the time. And they have to make a lot of decisions that you don't hear about, or, read over 1,000-page laws that you're not going to sit and actually think about if this is the right decision for you. You elect someone to represent your best interests, and so you need a certain level of trust in them that they will not waver from doing that.
Exactly. Now, I said at the beginning of our show today that I was going to give a brief byline of basically who I am. And the reason for that, as I explained to you before we started taping, was that I'm quite sure that there's going to be some folks out there, they're going to look at that, and they're going to, black folks at that, and they're going to look at this show, and they're going to say, well, who are those people? Especially the black guy there. Who is he to try to persuade the black community not to trust Hillary Clinton? Who is he to criticize what Hillary did in terms of Libya? Well, and very briefly, as you know, I'm Robert Gumbs. I'm born and raised here in New York City, in Harlem. You got a little bit of insight into my family. My dad was very much involved in New York politics. Myself, I've been in the military twice. First time in the Army, during Vietnam, and when I was a kid. And then a few years after that, I went and I joined the Navy. And the Navy gave me the opportunity to work at the White House and the Pentagon for 5 years. I had a top secret clearance, and I was assigned to a group called DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And it gave me that, along with the opportunity that I had to, to go overseas. It gave me the opportunity to get a pretty good idea, the basics of what American foreign policy is about. Um, that's why I am very critical of what our nation has been doing for the last 15 years. Now, I had mentioned also a little earlier that although I think that President Obama has been a fairly good president, there are some things that I disagree with him on. One of those things is the fact that he perpetuated the foreign policy of the second President Bush. Um, I say that based upon the experience that I had dealing and working with the Middle East. I also had the opportunity to work on Capitol Hill in my off-duty time. My last, yeah, that was, no, my next to last year, that was in '86. And I wound up working as a congressional aide in my off-duty time for the Democratic congressman that was in charge of the Iran-Contra investigation. And so I have some insight into how government works. And I even ran for Congress myself after I came off of active duty in the Navy. So it's not like I'm sitting here just grinding an axe and not knowing what I'm talking about. I think that Hillary Clinton, there's this thing inside of her that she feels that America must always prove herself in some kind of strange way. Couple of problems with that, and even Bill Clinton himself has admitted it. I don't know if you're familiar. Some of you all might be familiar with it. What happened in Rwanda? They make the movies about it, about the Great Massacre, and what have you. Well, America stood by and did absolutely nothing. This was during the term of Bill Clinton. As a matter of fact, what was that? His first term, if I'm not mistaken. And all that it would have taken was an agreement on the part of the United States for the UN to move their blue helmets into the area. And I don't know, I think it might have been the fear that if America acquiesced and allowed that to happen, maybe they were scared of refugees coming from Rwanda to the United States. I don't know. But for whatever reason, the United States didn't move, really didn't make a big issue about it. And, well, you know the story. Thousands upon thousands of people were slaughtered. Now we fast forward. Hillary is the Secretary of State. The whole thing in Libya, Obama's the president, so he ultimately has to take the responsibility. But that whole deal of going into Libya, that was Hillary. She always insisted upon the military option. And this is a woman who tries to say, well, look at me. I've fought for women around the world. I've fought for children around the world. What about all those children that died in Iraq? Remember the year between my war, 1991, and then what we did with from, what was it, '03, '04, with Bush Jr. Well, between that time, I know a lot of people don't realize this, we had a no-fly zone around Iraq, number one. Number two, we enforced a very strict embargo. And you had thousands of Iraqi children dying for want of food, for want of medicine. Now, I tell you, I think that our whole relationship with Iraq, and I'm not just trying to dump all this on the Clintons. I think our whole foreign policy in the Middle East has been a mistake. Um, Quite frankly, even though I consider myself to be a powerful, full-time Democratic believer, progressive, I think that after Bernie, the person who next best had a decent idea of foreign policy was what's the name? Not was it Ron Paul, the son?
Rand Paul.
Yeah, Rand Paul. I think that his foreign policy was basically along the lines of Senator Sanders and myself. You know, this idea that we build up and tear down governments in the Middle East at our will, it's wrong, it's dangerous, and it's damned expensive. And as a person who comes from a community that is very economically depressed, I take issue with the huge amounts of money that this type of foreign policy is costing us. You have a lot of Americans, you hear them out in the hinterland there talking about, oh yeah, well, if I was in charge, I would cut foreign policy. We don't spend any money on foreign policy, on foreign aid, per se. They call it foreign aid. It's not foreign aid where the money goes. It's what we do when we destabilize governments, all right? That's where the cost comes in. To move the fleet, like we did with Iraq, we have spent so far, I believe, what's the figure? Over $4 trillion and counting. And this is the insanity. This is the problem that I have with the president and Secretary Clinton, their policies, because they bought into this. I believe it was a mistake. Am I saying that Obama's a bad president? No. What I'm saying is that he's human, and for whatever reason, he made a mistake. I don't believe that the black community should penalize Bernie Sanders because he might have intimated that. And I don't, as a black American, I don't like black Americans being used as some type of shuttlecock or some kind of object in a game where Hillary tells the black folks, oh, see, he's against your man, the president, first black president. No, that's not right. That's not fair. And I think that's very poor politics on the part of our community. And I think that I hate to get into this whole thing about leadership because I believe God gave all of us a brain. But I do believe that this idea that anytime someone speaks against the president in a way of love, because Bernie has been very extremely supportive of President Obama, but yeah, to criticize him on certain issues of foreign policy, I think that that's wrong, and I don't like this. How do you feel about that?
I think that it's definitely good to criticize your predecessors because you don't just want to carry on exactly in the way that they did. You want to look at what they did well and what they didn't do well and try and improve on that. And I think Hillary is using her ties with Obama as an advantage. She knows that black voters in general love Obama, and so she's trying to say, I'm just like Obama. Vote for me because you like Obama, you'll like me. And I think that, I guess she did that in the last debate, the last couple of debates, and used really that as a strength of hers. But I think that a lot of people don't want a third Obama term. They see that he did a lot of things well, but that there's still dramatic changes that need to be made. And I think if if we have another Obama term or another 2 Obama terms, we'll just have the same exact status quo that we've had for the last 8 years. And it seems like people want more change than just what Obama was able to bring.
The way I've started to look at this, and I think this is something that needs to be said right up front. President Obama never had a fair shot from the beginning. And I think this is probably the first time, at least since the Civil War, where you actually had people plotting to tear down an administration. The things that he did try to do, as I said earlier, I think that he wasn't forceful enough. I think that you can be too careful, and I think that is one of the problems that I've had with the Obama administration. Also, and if you're going to talk about Black Americans, the policies on trade, I think he has been far too much into this whole free trade nonsense, because that's cost us jobs, especially when you're talking about a place like South Carolina. I think that was a mistake. The TPP, which, by the way, when she was Secretary of State, she was fully behind that TTP. But when she decided that she was going to run for president, which of course we all knew that she was going to do that anyway, but when she officially decided to come out, she basically, and you notice how she kind of hedged. Well, I think that there are things about TPP that need to be worked on. And then she slowly came around to saying, well, nah, this thing it ain't any good, And see, Bernie has always been against this so-called free trade. The reason being because it's not free. Mm-hmm. It's not only not free, as I said, it decimates American jobs. You look at the amount, you're talking about South Carolina, look at all the factories that have left South Carolina and have gone overseas. And see, again, we talk about the political structure and the way that wealthy corporations and wealthy people influence legislation. You had 2 professors, I think they're from Princeton, and what they had to say was, to me, it should be shocking to every American how much does our legislators actually listen to the average voter, as opposed to how much they listen to big-time lobbyists. And bottom line is that you and I, what the legislation that we know is important, and we tell that to our congressmen, to our senators, makes no difference. They just passed it. They did a thing with the Supreme Court. I think it was about 2 days ago. This is about climate change and also about the air that we breathe, the environment. And it was killed by the Republicans in the Senate, and even dragged it to the Supreme Court. They kicked it a few times to make sure that it was dead. Now, of course, everybody knows this type of legislation, it always goes to the appeals court before it gets to the Supreme Court. Didn't even bother. The Supreme Court jumped in. They saw it there, lying, dying, gasping for air and dying, after the Republicans in the Senate had stabbed it up. And they said, well, just to make sure, we're just going to jump in and stomp on its neck to kill it. And that's what they did. Now, what does that mean to you, to me, to the average man or woman walking around the streets in Charleston, South Carolina? Well, it means that the air that we breathe is going to be much dirtier. The planet that our children and grandchildren are going to inherit will be that much more decimated. And see, this whole thing about, I think we're running short on time, so let me help and wrap this up. this whole thing that we're talking about with Hillary and her so-called firewall in South Carolina, it's kind of like a circular conversation because it all comes back to the same thing. The people that pay you 600 grand for a couple of speeches, they're the ones that are basically pulling the strings in our government. So therefore, how can you come to me and say, I'm on your side, when this other guy over here with the huge wallet, he's getting all your attention? I stop and I hesitate when I speak on this because I'm trying to figure it out. And then when I raise the issue, somehow I'm doing something wrong. And that really bothers me. I have a problem with people that they consider themselves skilled in manipulating the English language. Because that means that, well, does yes still mean yes? Or no mean no? I don't understand that. And I think that as voters, we need to be very careful and we need to pay attention to who is trying to, gain our vote. Because we have a lot of issues. And I'm talking now not just as, black people, white people, Latino, Asian, Native American, but we have issues as people. And when you start playing these games about dividing people up and playing this type of tribal politics, I really think that you're asking for trouble. Because what happens then, politics becomes a squabble. It becomes a contest between you and I. You're white, I'm black. So we're fighting on that level. And meanwhile, the people who have the ability to control everything in the society, they don't have to, they're not really getting involved in that. It's like in the South, right after the Civil War. How did they break Reconstruction? Reconstruction was doing quite well. Poor blacks and out of slavery and poor whites were getting education because that's when they, in the South, that's when they started having public education. There was no general public education in the South for low-income people before the Civil War and Reconstruction. It was the Reconstruction legislatures that came in and that created the public education system. And what happened, how did the Bourbons, the powerful people in the South, how were they able to end that? Well, what they did, they started bringing out the race card. Why are you letting your kids go to school with inferiors? And so, again, eventually, after the federal government ended their, what's the word I'm looking for, impressment or the control of the Reconstruction in 1877, then year by year, the powers that be, they continued to play race, and the progressive South came to an end. And you had Jim Crow. And see, those are the type of things that happen when you have people with unlimited income, basically, have a license to do what they wish to do. And I fear very much that you have the same thing here. Am I accusing the preachers, the upper middle class African Americans in South Carolina of, taking money from the Clinton Foundation? No. But what I am saying is that you have to be careful, okay? when you look at a situation like what we have here. Um, I think Harry Belafonte, for example, who is a supporter of Senator Sanders, I think that he would basically try to point out the same thing. It might seem comfortable and easy um, for people in positions of influence to tell everyone, well, yeah, we should stick with the Clintons because they've always looked out for us. But as you pointed out earlier, that's not the case. That's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily the truth. And Bernie Sanders, he might not have marched in South Carolina or in Alabama or Mississippi, but he most certainly fought for the right causes here in the Northeast. I think that, and I was kind of surprised when John Lewis made that comment. Mm-hmm. You had a lot of what I would call freedom fighters right here because we had problems, or still do, right here in the Northeast. And Bernie Sanders was definitely on the right side of history. Mm-hmm. He was definitely having to do the frog walk, being handcuffed by the police for, demonstrating and what have you.
Yeah, I think the fact that he was arrested for fighting for desegregation mm-hmm. at however old he was, 18 or 19 years old, says a lot. I mean, what would you get arrested for? You have to be really passionate about something to actually fight for it that much. And that was when he was a teenager, and now he's 70 years old, and he's still fighting the exact same fight. Yeah. And I think that says a lot. And you look at Hillary Clinton, and the same time that Bernie was getting arrested for fighting that, she was working for a Republican who was responsible for a lot of what Bernie was fighting against.
Barry Goldwater, that's exactly correct. She was a Goldwater girl.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so you have to really look at it and say, well, where does your heart really lie? I mean, are you fighting this because you want the votes of black voters, or are you fighting it because you really, in your heart, believe it's the right thing?
Now, it's funny that you bring that up, because I remember the demonstration that they had. Oh my God, this was in the 60s. And I was a little kid then. I was a Boy Scout, as a matter of fact. No, I'm sorry, I was a Cub Scout. And right over here at Columbia University, they had shut down the campus, and Simon and Garfunkel were there. And that's what Bernie Sanders was about. That was, in the Northeast, that was the way that people fought against the people that would try to stop civil rights, integration, open enrollment, things of that nature. And I think that people, especially there in South Carolina, they need to be aware of that. They need to keep that in mind. Oh, by the way, I hope we haven't gone overtime. Have we gone overtime?
No, I haven't gotten. Okay. I'm not sure.
Okay. I have to be careful because many times my guests are so interesting and the subjects are so poignant and so about now that I totally forget about time. So if we run a little bit over, please forgive me. And also, as I said earlier, if I seem that I'm speaking more than usual, again, forgive me. I have a marvelous guest, and I had planned originally for her to do most of the talking, but I got so swept up in this particular subject because, quite frankly, as a black American, as I said earlier, African Americans have had an extremely hard way to go. And I don't like the idea of being used. And quite frankly, that's what I see in South Carolina. I always think anytime that somebody is going to try to get you in their corner by appealing to your genetic makeup, um, I truly believe that you have to think twice about that, you know. And just as I said before, I'm totally against voting for someone because they happen to share the same genetic background that I do. I think that's dangerous. It's what's in a person's heart, and it's what's in a person's head, and it's in what a person has done. I don't know of a job yet, even a job that it's already determined that you're going to get the job. They still want to have a resume, even if it's just something they can put on file. And when you look at Bernie's resume and you look at Secretary Clinton's resume, quite frankly, looking at the results, I think that Bernie's resume comes out a bit ahead of Secretary Clinton. And I think I pointed this out before. The whole aspect of her in foreign policy, because as a former Navy guy, that does kind of stick to me. The fact that she comes across as a neocon. I never heard of a progressive neocon. How can you be a progressive liberal? I have a great deal of problems with that. If you think that Assad is the cause of the problems in that part of the world, then my question to Secretary Clinton: why do you give Saudi Arabia a free pass? In the case of Saddam Hussein, in the case of Gaddafi, even in this case of Assad, women were definitely better respected, better treated. They had more freedom in terms of what they wanted to do, what they wanted to do with their lives, than Saudi Arabia has right now. I've been to Saudi Arabia. If I was a woman, there was no way in hell that I'd want to stay in Saudi Arabia. I have seen this craziness of 3 women sitting in the back seat, one in the front, and one guy and the guy driving. That's Saudi Arabia. I have seen American military women harassed. Why? They were driving a Humvee. I mean, how would you like to live in a society like that? Okay. Oh, watch out! You're looking at me. You're looking at me with your eyes. That's a no-no in Saudi Arabia for a woman to do. But along with other things, that's the problem. That's some of the problems that I see in terms of Secretary Clinton and her mistakes. It's been a good conversation. I hope that you folks have enjoyed listening to us. I know that the views expressed here on this particular show might have caused some problems for some folks out there. But as I said, the Concerned Forum will always say what they know to be the truth. And this is where you'll find it. This is where you find the truth. Right here on the Concerned Forum. And I thank you all so much for viewing in on us today. God bless and have a great afternoon. Thank you.